The 70s and 80s was the era of the wedge, angular cheese block profiles that saw us get cars like the Princess, the SD1, and in the world of super and sports cars, the Lamborghini Countach and the Fiat X19.
But if you wanted something British, your options were slightly more limited, let's say. You could have this little TR7 or a Scimitar SS1. Today, we decided to take both up for a drive and see what came out in front. Right, so here we are. Let's start off our comparison, shall we? First things first, because it was chronologically first, TR7.
Indeed. Now, of course, this car is born of the Triumph sports car lineage, which dated back to the mid-50s. So we've reviewed the TR2 on the channel before. Go and watch that.
Oh, you've got to be very careful, though, because a lot of Triumph or TR enthusiasts don't even consider this part of that line, do they?
Well, let's talk about why, then. Talk to me about the history of this like flawed gem of a sports car.
Well, it was built really as an American export, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it had to be successful in America to make BL some quick and easy money.
Well, to make BL any money, to be honest. It was a time which was quite tumultuous for BL in general. I mean, they were a decade out from closing altogether when this car was released in '75, weren't they?
The writing was kind of on the wall. So basically, MG and Triumph were challenged, design a cheap export sports car, and whichever one the management likes the best is the one that gets made.
And the reason they chose this design over the MG option was because they actually went and asked what the Americans wanted.
And what they wanted was traditional. They wanted front engine, simple and easy to work on, rear-wheel drive, manual gearbox, and a convertible, which is exactly what the Americans wanted.
Yep.
And the result,
they didn't quite get it at first, did they? Because in the early years, there was all this talk of banning convertibles altogether, such legislation that gave us the Porsche Targa and the funny roof in the Triumph Stag and all of these sorts of things.
And the Jaguar XJSC.
And the XJSC,
so,
of course.
As a result, this car, which came from a lineage of only convertible TRs, launched as a hardtop.
Yeah, and the hardtop wasn't really much of a looker, to be fair. I think that's where this car's problems start, is in the look. So let's break that down a bit, shall we? First things first, the thing that stares us in the face is that wedge design. Now, I love a wedge as much as the next man, but being for the American market, it inherited the American spec crash bumpers, or the impact bumpers that we know to hate. Because they protrude from the front and they really ruin that shape. In the coupe form, it was very angular, which again is a matter of taste.
It didn't really suit it. And the trouble is that BL was so cash-strapped they couldn't afford to develop a European spec car with smaller bumpers like they had done, obviously, because the MGB was chrome bumper first, then became rubber and so on. They didn't have the time or the budget to do that, so everyone got those great railway sleepers front and rear on the car. And if you look at it without them trying to envisage it, it sort of works.
It's not that bad. It's
I mean, Paris Man design, of course, the same man that brought us the Princess. And again, much like the Princess and the Allegro, the initial concept design looks fantastic.
It does.
Really sharp, almost like a Ferrari 308 from some angles.
It's called the Bullet, wasn't it?
It really was, yeah. And
not quite Steve McQueen.
Not quite Steve McQueen, but not far off. I think it does look superb as a concept car, but stick these federalised bumpers on it and that kind of controversial flank down the side, that kind of streak in it.
Yeah, that slash, as it were.
It just isn't quite right.
Look, another point of contention for a lot of Triumph enthusiasts was the power plants. Now, it was the 1850 that was pulled straight out of the Dolomite and then bored out to 2 litres with a little bit of extra work here and there. But again, it was never going to be that 6-pot bruiser from the 6 that came before, was it?
It couldn't pass American emissions regulations, and if it could, it would be strangled to the point of making about 100 horsepower, so it was never going to fly. So it would have to be, again, budget cuts. It had to be what would fit and what was cheap and easy to do, namely boring out the Dolomite engine. And as a result, well, talk me through this sports car engine.
Well, one remark I had when I first started it up is that it sounded a little bit air-cooled almost. That clutch fan is so tight that it just sort of whirs away as soon as you get anywhere near the top of the rev range.
It's not slow per se.
No, it's not slow, but it's not
exciting.
Quick. It's a little bit peppy. It's, you know, in the low end, it's got certainly more grunt than I think that SS1 does, but it's still not exactly going to be very pokey. And speaking of being pokey, these handling characteristics, oh goodness gracious, that's understeer.
It's a bit roly-poly.
Oh, we've got a bit of a slalom course here.
But
whoa, oversteer. Understeer into oversteer. It rolls and it rolls. And again, back to the Americans once more. It's a much more comfortable car. It does
ride well.
It rides
it's very comfortable.
But it doesn't.
Big bump here?
Didn't even notice it. But it doesn't really hook up as much as you'd
No,
like it to, does it? There's
it
a
doesn't.
lot of body roll, and you will find yourself door handling at the slightest of hairpins.
I think the trouble is you compare this to the TR6, which we've done a video on that.
Yes, and that was a lovely drive.
The TR6 is traditional sports car. It's low, it's got short travel suspension, and it's kind of dips and tucks into the road like a Healy 3000 does. It's wide, it's low, it grips. It's a little bit firm, but you know what the road surface is doing.
Yeah, it's communicative.
This almost
less
feels like,
so.
particularly with the engine, which isn't a very revvy, exciting engine. Forgive me for saying this, it almost sounds like a 2-litre saloon car, like a Cortina or something, because it doesn't handle badly, and it doesn't go badly, but it's just not exciting or lively while doing it.
And that steering goes even further to that end. I mean, on-centre dampness is a very real thing because of the era, but here it's especially so. I mean, even when you're loaded up in the corners, there's no feel through it whatsoever, and it's a real crying shame for someone wearing a TR badge. And when you put your foot down, even when you do use your full rev range, there's no real pickup in power band, is there?
It's so linear, which is great for usability.
But it feels like a CVT, it's so linear.
And it doesn't, you could hear it then probably, it doesn't sound very exciting.
No.
It doesn't really want to rev. I mean, you were really having to thrash that to get it to do anything there.
Yep.
It's fine. As a sports car, it's fine. That's the thing. It doesn't excite me, it doesn't make me smile.
Okay.
But it's a lovely day. We've got the roof down. It's comfortable, it's spacious. You know what? As
That's
a cruiser,
what I want to get onto, actually, because there are some things that this undoubtedly does better than the SS1 does. It's a lot more comfortable. It's a heck of a lot more comfortable. I know we've spoken about suspension already, but it's not just the suspension, it's the interior as well. It's a nicer place to be, I reckon. There's more space in here, especially for people of our stature.
there's a lot more bespoke switchgear, because we'll come on to this in a minute. The Reliant used a lot of parts being ironically Austin Rover switchgear. This has a lot more bespoke stuff, or from the VL stable, so it's meant to be there. You've got a huge amount of space. Look at the leg. I'm 6 feet tall and I can stretch out fully.
You can fit all your legs fully extended, and you can fit 2 fire extinguishers in there, which is really quite impressive.
We've got loads of space between us. You've got a nice big boot. As a tourer, as a grand touring car, and as a day-to-day driver, this is great. It's a really nice place to be. And you know what? I'm going to say this controversially for a BL product. I think it's quite well put together.
It is quite well put together. Things have held up really well over the years. This dash is actually uncracked, which for a dash of this material is rare.
The doors
but
fit
nothing rattles in here.
No rattles, the trim's all stuck together. Do you know what? This car has had a little bit of work done, but it's not been restored by any means. And you know what? It's not bad, considering all the BL horror stories you hear. And if you long-time viewers may remember around Montego, which did shake and rattle. This really doesn't.
No, it really doesn't.
What I'm getting at with the TR7 is there's nothing wrong with it, actually. You hear all these horror stories, but actually not only is it not a bad car, but it's a good one.
You just have to set your expectations straight.
I think this is it. You have to look at it. Look at what it looks like. It's a GT car, and even when they put a V8 in it for the American market and made it the TR8, it still wasn't a sports car. It was just a more long-legged GT. I mean, much like the MGC, it still wasn't this big British muscle car. And I think the thing is with the TR7 is if you adjust your expectations to expect a comfortable cruiser rather than a white-knuckle sports car, you've got a really good package.
Just because it isn't a great TR doesn't mean it's not a good car.
Agreed.
And a good car it is. So, shall we go and see if that SS1 is any better?
I agree. Let's head over and see what the Reliant's like. Now, unlike Triumph, Reliant don't really have much form for making sports cars, do they?
They don't, do they?
We traditionally think of them for three-wheelers, naming no particular TV shows or infamous characters.
None of that.
But they did spot a gap in the market, because obviously come the early 1980s, the MG Midget didn't exist anymore, it had been killed off.
Yes.
And there was no replacement for it, because MG were sportifying Austins by that point. So they spotted a gap in the market for a compact, lightweight, minimalist sports car. And they decided to create an expansion on their Scimitar range, because obviously the Scimitar GT already existed, but that was kind of a 2+2 GT car to rival the Capri and so on.
Princess Anne had one of those, you know.
She did. No one ever mentions it.
No.
So what they did was commission the great Giovanni Michelotti to produce what was codenamed the SS1, the Super Sports One, a new, more compact Reliant Scimitar. And it would actually be Michelotti's final piece of car design. And I think he did quite a good job of it.
He did. It wears that wedge shape a little better than the TR7 does, doesn't it?
I'd agree with that. It's a lot more compact, it's a lot sort of tighter and sharper, and obviously it has got pop-up headlights to retain that wedge shape, but unlike the TR7, not reverse hinged pop-ups, but forward hinged pop-ups.
Like a 928.
Oh, it just looks epic, doesn't it?
It does too.
Absolutely love it. And to be honest, there aren't many sort of finer details in this design, but I think it still looks really smart, really neat. I think it can stand toe-to-toe with more mass-produced cars like the TR7 and the X19.
One thing it does better than that TR7, and going back to my wedge analogy for a sec, it doesn't have that US enforced impact bumper, does it?
No, it doesn't,
It
no.
manages to blend it all in. Granted, it is made of plastic, so it makes it a little more crash conforming, but it doesn't have that jutty out bit at the front, and that's one thing that really eggs me about that car. It's that you have so many examples of those US crash impact bumpers being put on cars. I mean, look at the 308 we did last year. In the UK and in Europe, it didn't need to have it, and neither did the TR7 technically, but it was made for America first. As such, it retained them for the UK market too, which just doesn't make any sense to me.
Part of that is cost restrictions, obviously, because BL couldn't really afford to manufacture two separate variations, and Reliant certainly couldn't, and nor could they afford to make their own engine for this. So we didn't get Reliant's own engine, but we also didn't get the Coventry Climax engine that you see in three-wheelers. No. In this, we got Ford's all-new CVH engine that was introduced with the Mark III Escort.
Straight out of the XR3 in this case,
well, yes,
only with one crucial difference.
So it came out in 1.3 litre, guys. Then later it was a 1.4, and by this later model, you get a 1.6.
1600.
As seen in the XR3i, in fact.
Yes.
But the injection gubbins for the XR3i doesn't fit under the super low bonnet that you get in the Scimitar SS1. So this is a carburetted version of the XR3i engine, but not the XR3 variant. Long and short of it is fiberglass body, because it's a Reliant, so it weighs around about 800 kilos. Steel backbone chassis, fiberglass body. That means this thing weighs around 200 kilos less than your TR7 does.
Wowee. I mean, it looks about 200 kilos smaller too, to be fair.
It feels about 200 kilos smaller.
But having said that, as two 6 foot plus adults, we fit in it remarkably well, don't we?
We do, and the upshot of it all is that even with only a 1.6 CVH on carb, if you put your foot down, it goes. That is not bad. Come on.
Being close to the ground with an open top and having the elements with you definitely does help with that sense of speed.
No bodywork around you, very thin doors. 0 to 60, 9 seconds.
Ooh, broke the 10-second barrier.
I think that's pretty good.
That is pretty good.
It's a genuinely quick little car, and actually, a CVH can be quite an unpleasant sounding engine. It can be quite sort of tappy and grumbly and really quite rough and coarse. But this one, it's got a nice little grumble to it. It copies the ethos from the MG Midget that it was inspired by. It's low, it's small, it's compact, the doors are this thick, you've got this thin fiberglass body, and it weighs nothing. And as a result, you really can flick it around. I mean, it's got simple suspension, so it's not going to be the most comfortable. I mean, it's not too bad.
It's predictable at the end of the day,
absolutely. It's rear-wheel drive, but do you know what? We're here at Drive Dad's car. They've got a little slalom area here, so I can kind of flick it around a bit.
Jesus.
Do you know what though? It changes direction incredibly well.
Yeah,
it feels.
You have a clutch kick to it.
It feels really light. You know that we can go through the slalom here.
Hey.
Nice light steering, really sharp.
It's always going to roll, but it's remarkably neutral, and it's very well balanced. I mean, there's not a hint of understeer there.
Absolutely. Well, there's no weight to pull it out of line.
Of course.
Unlike the TR7. You know what? This feels so dainty and light on its feet, doesn't it?
It does just hook in.
Do you know what? I think this is great fun.
This would be great on a nice little back road, wouldn't it?
Really would. You know what? As a fun little sports car, this is great. It feels so nimble and minimalist. It does put you in mind of a midget in so many ways, and that's high praise from someone who loves MG midgets like I do. Snicky little manual, 5-speed.
Yeah, that manual is a bit of a funny shape, isn't it?
It's a slightly funny angle offset gear lever. It feels a bit like a Dodge Viper, actually, of all things. But you know what? Again, nice and snicky, small.
I wouldn't blame you for getting it confused with the handbrake at speed.
No, absolutely not. Then you get some sideways action.
Oh, goodness.
But the only thing I will say is the parts bin nature of the SS1, there's good and bad to that. Yes, you get the CVH engine, which is good. Yes, you've got, of course, the kind of lightweight, affordable plastic body, but there is some cost saving elsewhere. I mean, start with this interior. This is all Austin Rover.
Yes.
I mean, that's out of a Montego, that's out of a Maestro. I'm spotting air vents there, I think, from a Metro or something. Even the door handles from a Montego. And this steering wheel is Reliant's own design, but it is very basic and very sort of plasticky. It's not a particularly nice, luxurious place to be, and it doesn't feel as bespoke as the TR7 does.
This is true, but at the end of the day, this is much more of a driver's car. I mean, the TR7 was built for America. It was built to be spacious,
bit of a cruiser,
more of a cruiser than a speedster, as it were. And this is the opposite end of that scale, I'd argue to say.
I think so, but you're paying for the driving experience more than the surroundings. But there is one problem with that, which is this is a parts bin car. It's got a cheaper plastic body. It's got someone else's engine. It's got someone else's interior, basically, with all the switchgear. And yet, when this was new, the SS1 cost £7,700, which meant it was around the same money as a TR7 or an X19, which are both cars that were made by proper mass-produced companies. So as a result, it was not a big seller. Triumph predicted they were going to sell around 2,000 cars a year of the SS1. In total, over more than a decade, they sold 1,507.
Ouch.
So no, this was not a volume seller by any means.
No,
but
not a barnstormer, but
in many ways, as a classic today, that makes it more appealing in my eyes because it's so much more of an underdog. It's niche, it's less than... People know about the TR7 and those who know it love it, but unless you're in Reliant circles, you might not even know the SS1 exists.
Yeah, so much of the classic car scene these days is quirkiness, its individuality and its uniqueness, and if that's what you want, look no further.
It puts a smile on your face.
Also.
And because these are so unknown and unloved, they're cheap as well. You can pay half the money for one of these that you pay for a TR7. I think the thing is, in the world of classic sports cars, even in the world of 80s sports cars, the SS1 is niche. I mean, you hardly ever see one. Certainly the 1.8 Nissan Turbo version they made, I have never seen one. Let us know below if you've driven one.
If you've got one, let's drive it, please.
So we're driving this one today at Great British Car Journey here in Derbyshire. This is from the Drive Dad's Car Experience, so you can actually drive this very car if you want to. And we've just been informed they actually have another one. A lovely Portuguese chap has donated a left-hand drive on it. He's in the museum. We'll cut a shot in for you of that. So there is some love for these cars. There is some appreciation. And you know what? So. Deservedly so, because I think whether the looks are for you or not, I know it's not that refined. I know the build quality is iffy, but
I think the point, is it?
It's charming and it's great fun and it makes you smile, and that is what a little sports car should be all about.
Amen. So the question arises then, doesn't it?
As ever, yes.
Which would you prefer to have?
Go on then, over to you.
I don't think it's that difficult a decision, to be honest, on this side of the pond especially. I mean, obviously the Triumph wasn't really made for us at the end of the day, was it? It was made as an export and it served its purpose
It did
quite
well as that, yeah.
The Americans liked it a lot more than we did, and I think that rings true today as well. I, being a younger person, like something a little quicker, a little sportier, a little nippier. And once you're in the revs, it actually pulls quite well. Doesn't it? I think that settles it. I think I'll have the SS1, please.
Oh, I love the noise. When did the CVH sound so
good?
It's got a pop and bang map on it. It's like a Golf R. I mean, as
what
for
about
me,
yourself, good sir?
This is great fun. I didn't expect to like this as much as I do. I thought this would be some rickety, rattly, really unrefined. You'd have to make excuses for it. I'm not really making excuses for it. I think it's really good fun, and you can imagine having a great time on a B road in this because you're not going to get more than 40 to 50 mile an hour because you don't need to. It's just great fun.
And that's not to say it isn't rickety or banging. It is, but you just don't need to make an excuse for it because it's like that for a reason.
Exactly.
If you know that reason, then it's perfect.
You can justify it.
Yeah.
I do like the TR7. I'm a big TR7 fan. I don't think it's a very good sports car in comparison to this. The TR7 is not as exciting, not as nimble, not as fizzy, but it's a better car to use every day. And I think this sort of depends on your application. If you want a sports car that you can use every day, the TR7 is the better choice. It's better made, I can't believe I'm saying that. It's probably going to be more dependable, and there is a bit more of a community around them. You can find bits, whereas Scimitar SS1 parts,
good luck.
But as a classic that makes you smile, something that you're more inclined to go, let's go for a drive. I think it's going to be the Reliant,
It's going to be the Reliant. And to be honest, no one's daily driving either of these days, are they?
They're both classics. And if you want a classic, and it's going to be a car that you take out occasionally rather than daily to make you smile, then the Scimitar SS1 is the winner. So let us know in the comments down below, which would you choose, the TR7 or the Scimitar SS1? There are no losers here.
No.
But if you want a fun retro sports car, our vote, we agree, goes to the Reliant.
And
so
if you want to drive this one, come down to Drive Dad's Car here at Great British Car Journey. So with that,
go for a little hoon, shall we?
Yeah, let's go drive some other fun things, shall we?
Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for future content, and we'll see you again soon.
Ta-ra.
Woohoo! Three fire extinguishers. I'm gonna drive along like this.
Your dog should like fire extinguishers.